Hello, welcome to Spotlight, brightening the most heathenistic of the island's dark corners.
Spotlight, brought to you by the Isle of Man Arts Council.
This evening, we hear from queer Manx poet Simon Maddrell as he prepares to release a new poetry collection celebrating the whole island. Catch up with marine biologist, poet and author Fiona Gell as her critically acclaimed book Spring Tides is released in paperback. And hear more about this year's Arts Council Lecture with Kevin MacLeod, tickets for which are already more than 50% sold out. Remember, do get in touch with any creative, artistic endeavours you may be involved in, planning, hoping to create, or would really like to put in the spotlight. This programme, poetic, visual, theatrical, musical, literary, sculpture, mime, anything else that fits in. Email me, spotlight@manxradio.com. Howard Kane, that's Kane with an E, at manxradio.com works as well. Now, we last spoke to Brighton-based Manx poet Simon Maddrell back in March as he launched a collection of his work named Isle of Sin, which celebrated the life of Manx actor Dursley McClendon. Well, never one to rest on his laurels, Simon has a new collection coming out shortly entitled The Whole Island, which he'll be launching on the Isle of Man, appropriately enough, next month, and promoting with events and readings. I spoke to him down the line from his home in Brighton and asked if the name of the collection reflected his love of both the Isle of Man as a unique geographical location and as a cultural inspiration from his homeland.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, not just cultural. I think from nature and wildlife and family, folklore, all of those things, really. I mean, the centerpiece of the collection is a poem that actually Culture Vannon has shared before, which is called The Whole Island, which was inspired actually by a Cuban poet called Virgilio Pinera, who wrote a poem of the translation to it has been The Whole Island. It's actually the weight of the island, technically. And he wrote a very, very long poem about Cuba. And I stumbled across it through some rather odd means by watching a film and a quote at the end of a film, which happened to be from that poem. And it really struck me. I was inspired to write that poem, which sort of takes you through a journey of right the way back to my father unscrewing the doorknob from Greneby Farm one time just after my brother died, all the way around the island. And then all of the other poems are looking at, say, at different aspects. Family, there's quite a bit about folklore in there, and wildlife. I mean, particularly, of course, the Manx shearwater, which is a good metaphor and allegory for Manx people as well, of course. So many of us disappear around the world and then come back again.
That is true. That's very true, actually. I think it's that island, and specifically because it's an island, I think it has that sort of unique pull in many ways. You mentioned the Cuban piece and that inspiration. Is that the way it works when you're coming up with a new collection? Do you sort of have the inspiration and have a piece and then sort of have other pieces and make it into the collection? Or do you have the concept in your head first for the idea for a collection of works and then sort of populate it with the poems?
Oh, no, definitely. In this case, it's around... The inspiration has been writing about the island. I think it's probably got countless poetry collections in it, to be honest. And I see this as my next step to eventually creating a full Manx collection. So this Cuban poem it rang my bells because it was about an island, and I could then see how that could be translated to my thoughts on the Isle of Man, because he also sort of, if you like, had a certain ambivalence to their own country. He was born in the early 1900s and was a queer man, and therefore struggled with some of the aspects of the country, but delighted in other aspects of the country, which probably is a thought that sounds familiar.
Yes, yeah, I think that it is, very much in recent times. I think people would think along those lines very much. You say in the notes that the collection is like an allegory for the nature of your own queerness and also the environmental threat. are they sort of treated separately, or can you sort of draw links between those two seemingly very separate elements?
I'm trying to think now of the different poems. Yeah, they're probably separate. I mean, nature is very queer in every possible way that you can think of the word queer. To be honest, I mean, it's the oddities of it, the nature of sex and gender in nature is obviously much more diverse than we accept it. Well, certainly than we accept it as in humanity, and and biologically, it is literally different too. I think when you write, it's funny when people ask, what do you write about, or because I think if you're digging down into a subject and exploring it, then yourself is going to come out, whether that's your Manxness, your maleness, your queerness, is going to come out in some way or other within the writing. And obviously, sometimes you may have an idea that this wants to be like Queer Fella. I thought of it in hindsight as the journey from shame to unashamed. Where this is much more directly a sort of a classical poetic book, if you like, that's looking at as exploring the whole island, and only a part of that is exploring my place in a family and my place as an individual, and other parts of it are much more specifically exploring either a specific place, like Portivullen. There's a poem about Portivullen. There's quite a few around Port Erin, or it's exploring specific species of wildlife. It's not in the book, but I've got one on wallabies, where actually that did when writing about it, funnily enough, turn into a poem about queerness, because that's there's now as queer as the biggest population of wallabies in the Northern Hemisphere, being on an island as small as ours.
There's no doubt about that, I don't think. Do you think, you're saying, talking about your own queerness and your own sexuality, does it imbue a unique quality to all your poetry? Or maybe to flip it on its head, do you ever think, how different would my poetry be if it wasn't queer?
I don't think about the second. It sounds a bit that sounds a bit more like a death wish to me. But I mean, I'm told so. I think is probably the answer. I mean, I think I write poetry and poems that are very, very different, but I'm told by people close to me that even though they can still tell it's me.
Yeah.
So I think the poet Jack Underwood talks about how, as we poets sort of have our own tray, and he turned to me and said, "And yours is very full." And I think that's what we can draw from. As we age, our tray gets fuller. Our life experience can fill it up. And that can be of good and bad, of course. And that's what we draw upon.
Have you got perhaps one you could read to us today?
Yeah, sure. This is actually the first main poem in the book. There's a sort of a frontispiece poem which is after E. Cummings and usually it ends with a quote from E. Cummings rather than begins, called "Going Home is the same whichever way we go, by air or by sea. We risk the same as we do in love, either to crash and burn or drown instead, to lose ourself and hence to lose our love, perhaps, both asked and answered. Here is the rub. For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourselves we find in the sea."
And Simon will be on the island for the launch tour of the whole island. That starts at Henry Bloom Noble Library on Wednesday the 14th of June, with readings from his current and previous collections. An official launch at the Black Dog Oven in Peel on Thursday the 15th, where friend of the show and current bard Michael Manning will also be doing some readings, by the way. A Q&A session at Culture Vannon on Friday the 16th between 1 and 2, that's over lunchtime. Book signing at the Bridge Bookshop in Ramsey on Saturday the 17th between 11 and midday. Another reading at the Archie Knox the next day, Sunday the 18th between 7:30 and 9:30pm. And readings and a Q&A session on Monday lunchtime, that's the 19th, at Ty Slewellian at St John's. And you can contact Simon if you want to hear more. Gay Manx Poet, capital G, M and P, at btinternet.com for more details, or if you'd like to book him for readings and such like. I'm sure he'd be delighted to oblige. A lovely chap.
Spotlight, brought to you by the Isle of Man Arts Council.
Now, another book by a Manx author and indeed published poet, which has been receiving rave reviews since its publication a year ago, deals not so much with the whole island as the wonderful waters in which it sits. Spring Tides is the first book by Dr. Fiona Gell, well known on the Isle of Man for her work in marine biology and particularly with regard to the island's marine nature reserves. Well, after the success of the hardback version of the book, it's going to be released in paperback tomorrow. That's the 25th of May as we speak. I caught up with Fiona to hear more about the feedback she's received about the book and if she had any new projects underway.
So it's been really nice to get feedback, and some of the really lovely feedback has been from people who moved off island a long time ago, and when they read the book it really brought back memories of their childhood on the beach around the island, and some of the traditions and just island life really. So that's been really nice from particularly from older people who it's brought back really happy memories for. And then there's been the more of the kind of formal feedback in terms of reviews and feedback from the writing community and things, and that's again it's been really interesting to hear what aspects people have enjoyed. So some people have really picked up on the kind of science and marine conservation side of things, and then others have been much more interested in the insight that it gives to life in the Isle of Man, and maybe people that didn't really know much about the Isle of Man before that have had feedback on that as well. And then one of the other aspects that quite a few people have commented on is the kind of personal perspective that I've taken on marine conservation and motherhood and working as a marine scientist and conservationist, and that kind of insight into the kind of the sort of practice of doing marine conservation. So it's been I think everyone's taken different things from it, but it's been really nice to hear which bits people have particularly enjoyed and what they've taken away from it. And I suppose one of my main kind of forces in putting it together was around promoting the importance of our marine life, and I think that's again it's been really nice to get that feedback in terms of people not realising quite how much amazing marine life we have around the Isle of Man or around the British Isles, and that's that I feel like it's served its purpose from that point of view as well, when people particularly when people focus on things like the basking sharks or some of the habitats, the eelgrass and things that they've really been captured by and then want to come and see, or so that's been really nice to hear that.
Did you have a sort of very clear idea of what the book was going to look like when you started it?
It has really evolved over the years. So it started off being much more focused on telling the story, it's a personal story about some of the really important species and habitats that have really captured my imagination over the years. But as I developed the book, one of the story that my editor and in particular was really interested in was the story of working as an academic and then bringing the academic background back to the place I'd grown up in, and then working to develop the marine protected area. So that became the sort of the story in the book, and that did mean that it became more personal than perhaps I'd set out to write, in terms of that telling a very personal story, but I suppose the real substance of the book being around the kind of marine conservation work and how important the sea is and so on. So it was quite an interesting process to kind of weave the story out of the kind of the things that I really wanted to write about, and that I wanted to share through my writing. So it was a kind of gradual process, I suppose, and to end up with this format it's in now.
Yeah, I'm with you. And you talk quite a lot about introducing your son from very early age, taking him out, showing him the island, showing him favourite spots, showing him the countryside. Is this something that you're passionate about as well? Because it's it's all about, I suppose, education and thinking about the generations that follow us, and that if they don't take an interest in these sort of issues, in the conservation of the sea, of marine environments, marine habitat, species, then frankly, we're not going to be around forever. It's for the next generations, really, for them to take on as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, in my role as a marine conservation officer, I did a lot of work in schools, and when you go into schools, your children are, they love the sea, they love marine creatures, and they have such a kind of connection, and they want to look after the sea, and the idea of doing anything bad to it is, it's that children have got that instinctive connection. But I suppose one of the things I wanted to do with the book as well is kind of rediscover that kind of childhood love of the sea, and help other people do that, so that because I think inevitably it's lost as people get older, and then I think that disconnect, it makes it much easier for the wrong decisions to be made about managing the sea and looking after it, because people have lost that childhood passion and love for the sea. So yeah, I think I hope that describing my childhood experiences of the sea, and also my son's love of it, hopefully that helps inspire other people.
So here we are then, a year on. So there's now going to be a launch event for a paperback version of the book, which hopefully will open up into a whole new audience. I know some people always like to go straight for hardbacks, particularly if they're book lovers or like first editions and such like. But for maybe more of a mass audience, bringing it down, the paperback version coming out.
The Bridge Bookshop, which have been amazing, with their branch in Ramsey and Port Eyre, and two places that I write a lot about in the book. They're also, I'm going to be in the Ramsey store on Saturday doing a signing at 2:00 in the afternoon as well. So, and
then, as you say, so the official launch date, if you can't get to those actual events, is the 25th, which is that Thursday, or is that?
Yes, so that's when it will be.
So that'll be out in the shops and available then for people to go for. Now you're sort of a year in. You've obviously published poetry before. You've got this book out. Do you feel there's more you can, now that you've sort of done the writing book and got it out there? Do you feel like there's a volume 2 or a sort of follow on to this book within you?
Potentially. I think I am working on something at the moment that's quite different, so that's not a part 2, but I think I think sometime in the future there's lots of other aspects of marine conservation that I would love to write about, so yes, I think.
Just thinking again about things people might associate it with, like the Marine Nature Reserve. Where are we with that now around the island? Are you still sort of involved with that at all?
So I'm not directly involved anymore. There was a international target for 10% of marine protected area of waters to be protected, and the Isle of Man's well met that now. It more than 10% are protected in the marine nature reserves. But there's now, since November, the new biodiversity commitment is to have 30% of global waters protected effectively by 2030, and so that's kind of the next step for all countries around the world. And I guess for the Isle of Man, the work that I was doing was very focused on the inshore waters. So all of that well over 10% of marine nature reserve are in the inshore waters out to 3 nautical miles. So over 50% of our inshore waters that we can see easily from the coast are really well protected. But beyond the 3 nautical mile limit, there aren't any marine nature reserves. So countries around the world are now looking at how they can effectively protect 30% of their waters, but also sustainable fisheries and all the other kind of important services that we get from the marine environment. And a really exciting initiative on the Isle of Man is the Blue Carbon Project, which is being done to map the capacity, the current blue carbon that's stored, and look at the capacity to improve that. So all these things, and then obviously there's opportunities for offshore wind energy. So I think this is a real, it's an exciting opportunity, but also a challenge for countries around the world to ensure that a really good proportion, at least 30% of the waters, are really well protected by 2030, but balancing all these other needs as well, so that we get all those benefits that we can get from the sea, whilst allowing nature to thrive and to really restore and maintain all these amazing habitats and species that we have, and really realise that vision of an even more diverse and beautiful future for global seas. But obviously I'd be particularly interested in what we can do in Manx seas as well.
It's a fascinating read. Treat yourself to a paperback copy if you didn't pick it up in hardback. That's out tomorrow, Thursday, 25th of May. Fiona will be at the Bridge Bookshop in Ramsey for a book signing at 2 p.m. this Saturday. Looking ahead a little, and after the great success of last year's Isle of Man Arts Council Lecture, this year's lecture will be given by Kevin MacLeod, well known to many from his fronting of the Grand Design Show, but so many more strings to his bow. And despite the event not being on for several months yet, tickets are already more than half gone. So don't hang around. I found out more when I spoke to Arts Engagement Officer at Isle of Man Arts Council, Ali de Backer.
He's our guest for our annual lecture, which is at the Gaiety Theatre, so just as the same as Louis Theroux last year. And that's on the Monday the 25th of September at 7:30 p.m. You can get your tickets via villagaiety.com, and we're very excited to have somebody very different this time. I think a couple of people have been quizzing us a bit like, why are you getting somebody from the television coming again? But I think a lot of people may not be aware of Kevin's artistic background, not just from being a TV presenter for Grand Designs. It was quite interesting to find out that he studied history of art and architecture at Cambridge University, and he's a lighting designer also as well as studying architecture. So we're all really looking forward to listening to what he has to say.
It's so hard to actually sort of think of another one the next year, isn't it? I think, is there a sort of a gang of you sit around saying, right, where are we going to go now, guys?
Yes and no. It depends on people's availability as well. I think we get that a lot through the culture division. It depends on people's availability and obviously budget-wise as well, and how relevant it is to the lecture series. That we do want to try and give a variety to all art forms if possible. We're really looking forward to it this year.
And so I think people know him from Grand Designs probably?
Yes, that's right.
Where they'll probably recognise him, but he's not just going to be, as you say, talking about that. It's going to be a much broader talk.
Yeah, I mean, he's such an interesting character anyway. I mean, he was awarded an MBE for his services to architecture as well, so we'll be chatting to him as well about that. And also, like with Louis Theroux, we'll be getting people to submit questions to him and maybe have a bit of audience participation again.
Okay, so it's going to be a similar format, do you think?
Yeah, very similar format. We've got Christy, who's going to be our compere again for the evening. And yeah, it will be very different to Louis, which I think we're all really looking forward to. Bit of a variety.
Yeah. And do you get a mixed sort of audience for these sort of things? Do you get a real sort of broad spread of sort of patrons coming to see these sort of talks?
Definitely, we're definitely seeing a different demographic this time, because obviously if you're interested in architecture, or if you're even interested in lighting, we've had a lot of interest from people that way. And also if anybody's doing any DIY jobs at home, or if they're doing any landscaping or anything like that, there's quite a lot of design aspect that he will be appealing to, especially with anybody who's involved in design. He's very well versed in design.
So he's not a TikToker as well, is he? Because I know I was surprised last year because I thought the audience for Louis Theroux would be maybe on the upper end of the age bracket, but there were loads of young ones there because he'd done his TikTok.
That's
dance.
right, yes. Poor Louis with his TikTok dance. People not recognising him for his journalistic qualities, just for his TikTok fame. It'd be a very different evening. We just can't wait to show him around, our island really, and the architecture here. He's never been to the island before.
I was going to say, yeah, it's a first for him.
Yeah, it is a first. Obviously, we've got some very interesting buildings that I'm sure we will love if we get the chance and he has the time to show him. And hopefully he'll just get a bit of experience of the creative community here.
So, tickets on sale now, aren't they?
Yes, they're on sale via Villa Gaiety's website, villagaiety.com. They are selling very well. I think we've sold well over half for September.
Well, that's good going.
Yes, not like Louis, but obviously it's very different to Louis. So the date is on Monday, the 25th of September at 7:30 p.m. at the Gaiety Theatre.
That's about it for this week. Don't forget, if you want to hear anything again, go to manxradio.com, download the Spotlight podcast, listen where you want. Why not try it cranked up loud on your headphones whilst watching the TT from Bagarrow? See you next week, when among other joys, we will be speaking to the man and the legend, Derry Kissack, about his new book on the purple helmets. Look after yourselves, and whatever you're doing, be creative about it. Cheerio.